Welcome to the annual meeting of the Newfound Area School District. My name is Ned Gordon. I'm the moderator. And we're going to begin this morning with, as we usually do, with our Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to ask Barbara Greenwood if she'd lead us in that Pledge of Allegiance today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you'd remain standing just for a second. This is a time when we ordinarily have an invocation. We normally invite somebody to provide us with a prayer. But today, instead of doing that, I'd just like to ask you to indulge me for a minute. This is the 20th consecutive year that I've presided over the annual meeting. During that time, there have been changes in the places where we meet, changes with regard to the way we vote, changes, certainly lots of controversies over the years, and there's been a constant debate over how we should provide education, what education we should provide, and how much we can afford. The school board members have changed, budget committee members have changed, and over the last 20 years, there have been several changes in administration. I've had the pleasure of working with several superintendents. Each brought to the job their own priorities, their own talents, and their own personality. But none, in my opinion, served with any more grace than Marie Ross. She had a disarming smile, and while she was strong in her convictions, she recognized that she was here to serve the people. When she spoke here at our meetings, Marie was never demeaning of others. She wasn't pejorative. She was always thoughtful and respectful of the points of view of others. In my view, she was driven by her service and not by her ego. Last year, we saw a substantial change in our district due to our collective decision to cut the budget. While she may not have agreed with that decision, instead of being belligerent or defiant or bellicose, she made difficult choices. She made careful decisions, thoughtful decisions, and she acted professionally in carrying them out. Marie's unexpected disability and death gives us all reason to think about our own short lifetimes. May we attempt to be as thoughtful and as caring as she was, and may we be as kind as she was to others. And I'd just like to have you join me in a moment of silence in memory of Marie Ross. Thank you very much. Please be seated. We'll begin with introductions, and I'm going to call upon the chair of the school board, Vincent Migliori, to introduce the school board members.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This morning we have here with us Lloyd Belbin from Bristol. We have Paul Reinhardt from New Hampton. And next to Paul is Ruby Hill from Danbury. And Suzanne Cheney from Alexandria. Don Franklin from Hebron. And of course you have interim superintendent, Dr. Phil McCormick, and to my right, Business Administrator Dan Rossner. I represent Bridgewater, and unfortunately I got a call this morning from Yuri Hajek, who represents Groton, and he is severely ill, so unable to be with us. Thank you.
And calling upon Fran Wendelbo to introduce our budget committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am proud to introduce the Budget Committee for this year. First, we have John Vobel from Bridgewater, who's the Vice Chair. Then we have Sharon Nelson from Groton, Skip Riley from Alexandria, William Joseph from Bristol, Stan Newton from Hebron, and last but not least, Simon Barnett from Danbury. And as the moderator said, I am Fran Wendelboe. I represent the town of New Hampton. And we do have one additional member that kind of does double duty, and Paul Reinhardt from New Hampton also serves on the Budget Committee representing the school board. Thank you.
Note that we do have a clerk here, a clerk taking minutes, and that's Leah McDevitt, who's sitting over here. I'd also like to recognize Sue Cross, who's the administrative assistant to the superintendent and who has coordinated and put together the meeting today and worked hard in doing so, and she should be recognized for that. I'd also like to recognize the fact that I think we have two state representatives here today, Suzanne Smith from Hebron and Skip Riley. I think those are the only two representatives who turned out here today, and thank them for doing so. If you have any questions about education funding, I'm sure you could ask them. All right, as most of you know, our annual meeting now comes in two parts. Today we hold the deliberative session, and we'll begin. What we're going to do is discuss the articles which have been placed on your warrant for your consideration. The second session actually consists of the voting on the articles, the final voting on the articles. That will take place on town meeting day on March 12th. One thing that you all need to be aware that at this meeting, the only people who are allowed to participate in the meeting are registered voters in the 7 towns of the district. It doesn't matter that you live in one of the towns or that you own property in one of the towns. You need to be a registered voter in those towns. And I'm just going to have a show of hands of anyone who's in attendance today who is not a registered voter in one of the 7 towns. If you just raise your hands. See a hand up here, a couple of hands. Okay. And we're expecting that those individuals won't participate. Keep your eyes on them. What happens is, what's going to happen today is we're going to go through the articles one at a time. I'm not going to do the old town meeting format. Basically, what I'm going to do is read the article. I'm going to call upon a proponent, either a member of the school board or a budget committee member, to speak to the article, and then we'll open it up to discussion. We're going to give everybody who came here today who wants to speak on an article an opportunity to speak at least once. And after everybody's had an opportunity to speak, or we've had an adequate amount of debate, I'll take a motion to close the debate, then we'll close the debate and move on to the next article. If you're called to speak on, you need to come to the microphones. As you can see, we are recording the meeting. You need to participate. You need to come to a microphone to participate. If you raise your hand in your seat and I call upon you, you can come to the microphone, but I got to tell you, I'm going to give priority to people who come to the microphone. So even if you raise your hand, you're sitting in your seat, if somebody else comes to the microphone afterwards, I'm going to give them priority. So you need to come to the microphones to speak. You need to direct all your questions and your comments to the moderator. If you do have a question, we'll do our very best to try to get it answered. When you do come to the microphone, just identify yourself with your name and the town in which you live. I think you all know this by now. You need to be respectful in your comments. I always think that the best comments are short comments, brief and to the point. You need to avoid profanity, of course, and you need to avoid making your comments personal. As I've said in the past, that doesn't mean you can't criticize a public official. If you are a public official, you're subject to criticism for the job you do, but you shouldn't make your comments personal. For example, if you can say, I don't think Ned Gordon does a very good job as moderator, which is, I think, fine criticism, but you shouldn't say, I just think Ned Gordon's an idiot. Okay? That's the difference. The idea of the whole meeting is that it will be run fairly and efficiently. That's certainly my objective here today, is to go through fairly and efficiently, give everybody an opportunity to participate who wants an opportunity to participate. And we'll go through as efficiently, as quickly as we can. On articles, each article that's presented is ultimately going to be on the warrant. So every article that you see there, we can't today decide that we're not going to have one of these warrant articles on the warrant. They'll all be there in some form. Some of them have to be in the form in which they are currently on your warrant. For example, the article to repeal the tax cap That's statutory language that's going to have to be on the warrant just as it appears today. There are some articles that can be amended. For example, the budget article, if there are people who want to amend a financial amount in the budget article, they can do so. If you decide that you want to have an amendment, you need to put that in writing in advance. Okay, so you can come, make your amendment, do it in writing. Your amendment will have to be seconded just like any other meeting, and then we'll discuss the amendment, and then we'll vote on the amendment to determine whether or not we're going to adopt that today. We're going to try to do everything by voice vote today. You know, we have a relatively small group today, so we're going to try to do everything by voice vote if we can do that, and we can determine the vote. If we couldn't do that, I'll try to I'll do a hand count and pick some ballot clerks to assist me in doing that. But if we need to do a ballot vote, we're prepared to do ballot votes today. And we will do a ballot vote if required. Remember that the current law requires that you present an ID to vote. And I guess with that, we'll get going. Article 1, of course, is always to choose necessary school district officials for the year ensuing. You will have a list of officials, those who may have signed up for office for the district, and you'll be voting on that at town meeting day on March 12th. Article 2, teacher contract agreement. To see if the Newfound Area School District will vote to approve the cost items included in a one-year collective bargaining agreement reached between the school board and the Newfound Area Teachers Association, which calls for the following increase in salaries and benefits. Year 2013-2014, estimated cost $56,793. And further, to raise and appropriate the sum of $56,793 for the 2014 fiscal year, such sum representing the additional costs attributable to the increase in salaries and benefits required by the new agreement over those that would be paid at current staffing levels. Article is not included in Article 7, the operating budget. The school board recommends, and the budget committee also recommends. And is there someone who would like to address that? Mr. Migliori.
Yes, sir. I'll just be showing you a few slides.
Mr. Sinclair, would you mind pushing the power button on the slide projector in front of you? Thank you, sir. Just take a second for that to warm up.
I see it coming. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to you all. First slide is just to capture your attention. I'm sure you recognize it. It's also intended to warm up the screen, as you saw. Article 2 is the teacher's contract agreement. This past year, all 7 school board members agreed to be the negotiating team to work with NADA, the Newfound Area Teachers Association. There are inherent advantages in communication with such an approach. I won't speak about the disadvantages, but the intent of this board is to be more communicative, and this was a way to achieve that. All board members more closely understood the needs and positions of our contract employees. Through the efforts of both groups working together, and after several scheduled meetings, we came to an agreement, one that we all support. What is proposed in Article 2 is a recommendation to the voters and supported unanimously by the school board after a cohesive effort to understand both sides. The major message is this. This is a long-term cost avoidance opportunity to the voters of the Newfound Area School District. We would hope that you will support it. The cost avoidance opportunity is achieved via a change to the health plan from a $5 copay to a $20 copay per visit, as well as a reduction in the district's monthly premium payment cost at the current rate of 90% down to 87%. In exchange for these changes, NADA agreed to a modest increase in salary and benefit costs, estimated to be a one-time overall cost of approximately $57,000. Now this chart illustrates two slopes. The timeline is in the center. That's where we are today. The red plan is where we are today. The red line is the plan, Matthew Thornton Blue with the $5 copay. You'll notice the current cost trajectory of what a no vote means, just to be clear. The forecasted slope and impact of the recommended yes vote is as shown in the what should be green dotted line. There's a significant difference, and you can see year by year what those savings are that are cumulative over a period of 4 years. So the yes results in a currently projected 4-year cost savings to NASDAQ in a total amount of $650,000. If Article 2 is passed on Election Day, March 12th. The major message is this: the long-term cost avoidance opportunity requires a yes vote on Article 2 on March 12th. We will also explain to you the relation of Article 3 to Article 2 when the moderator calls for that discussion, and Dr. McCormick will explain.
Questions or comments about Article 2? I'm not doing it since it doesn't need to be seconded. I know I have done that in the past, but I'm not going to do it in that form today. Okay. And any discussion, any comments? Yes,
Mr. Moderator,
Mr. Anderson.
Wayne Anderson, Summer Road, Bristol. I have a question. So this provision, this article, would lock in a 4-year term for the health care benefits at a contribution that the school board or the community will fund at 87%. The teachers will pick up the 13%. Are we understanding that correctly?
You're asking whether it's a 4-year commitment?
Yes, for that portion of the article.
Do you want a motion from the speaker? You want to get permission?
The only people who are allowed to participate are those who are registered voters in the towns, but it's been our policy in the past to allow people who work for the school district to speak. And unless some objection to that, then I'm going to allow the school district officials or employees to speak, okay? And that includes Mr. Rosner.
To answer your question, sir, what you're voting on is a 1-year contract. And the nature of it is, once the master agreement is changed, if this were to be approved, the health care benefit to the employees covered by the agreement would change. So we would negotiate future contracts. As I say, it's a 1-year contract that sets salaries and benefits for the coming year. But the nature of the collective bargaining agreement, any collective bargaining agreement, is that until another agreement is reached, those salaries and benefits are locked. So to come off this different health care plan, they would require, that would be a negotiated item in a future contract. But it's a 1-year contract that's being voted on. But what we're trying to do is portray the cost savings associated with the change in health care plan if the contract is approved.
For this 1 year, correct?
Well, it's a 1-year, I'm trying to be clear, it's a 1-year contract, yes, but those changes would theoretically be permanent until another change was negotiated.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Sinclair?
Miles Sinclair from the town of Groton. First off, I would just like to thank the teachers union for honoring their agreement from last year with the zero increase. And secondly, I would like to say that it appears to me, again, based on my history and involvement in prior negotiations, that this is a reasonable agreement. It appears there's been, good faith concessions made from both sides. To that end, it appears to me to strike a proper balance, and for whatever it's worth, I approve and support the proposed contract. I guess what I would like to do, though, is one of the things that's always troubled me is when you go into the voting booth and you look at language such as this, it doesn't really tell you what's involved. It gives you the bottom line figure. So I guess initially I need to ask a question. Is it fair to say that the only items involved here are a concession in health care coupled by an increase in wages? Or are there other issues involved?
Off the top of my head, there's some modest language changes to the contract, but the bulk of the accomplishment, I think, is what you see before you.
Because in the interest of transparency and providing voters in the voting booth sufficient information to make an informed decision, I was looking to propose an amendment. And at this point, it would just be to insert this language or something similar wherever appropriate within the article to read, "The agreement calls for all teachers to be moved up one step on the pay scale," which is my understanding what the wage benefit increase is, and either leave it like that or in exchange for concessions in other areas. Or, again, just to be transparent and informative. Would an amendment such as that be accurate, I guess is my first question.
I think this is one of those things where you might consider putting faith in your local governing body, in this case the school board. One of the attempts that we made last year and this year was to do a mailing to all 7,500 voters as estimated, and to explain each article in English rather than in the legalese that's required. My personal feeling is that the knowledge of the step increase would be more confusing. I personally would not like to see an amendment to this. I'd like to keep it as simple as possible and send the message to everyone that a yes vote would be wise for the projected forecast reasons in terms of a fiscal basis. I think it's important to recognize that, as you did, Miles, that it's a fairness issue as well. And the teachers have agreed with the school board, and the school board have agreed with the teachers on what this compromise says. And it requires a salary increase.
Is it the intention to this year mail out that same informational letter?
I'm disappointed to hear that because it should have arrived to everyone's home by now. Good. Maybe if we could have a show of hands if anyone didn't get it. Okay, so there's a few.
Does that informational letter provide further details other than what's in the article as currently written?
Yes, it does. Just by way of a slight visual, this document is what you should have received in the mail again this year. It's very similar to what was used last year, and on the right side of the document we attempted to explain the warrant articles as objectively as we possibly could in English. If you like, I would, with your permission, to read the explanation.
I don't think so. I think what we'll do is we'll let Mr. Sinclair read
Okay.
it to see whether he's satisfied, and then we'll give him another opportunity to speak. And Mr. Sinclair, why don't we let somebody else speak, and then if you want to come back and you still have a concern, then you could make your motion. Yes, ma'am.
Deirdre Conway, Alexandria. Is this on? President of the Newfound Area Teachers Association. I'm not sure where legal counsel is. Do we have any?
Right here.
We do not vote on language changes, correct? We only vote on financial aspects of the teacher's contract, am I correct? So therefore, he could get language information from the SAU. It's not anything that needs to be voted on.
Well, I'm not sure it can't be voted on, and I'm not sure that there can't be language changes unless the language is statutorily required. And perhaps council can provide some guidance in that regard.
I'm Peter Bronstein, counsel for the school district. Just to understand your question, are you asking if this meeting can change the language in the collective bargaining agreement?
No. No, I was trying to understand what Mr. Sinclair wanted to know, if there were indeed language changes made to our contract.
That was my question.
Okay, because that does not need to be on the warrant.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Mr. Wheeler.
Having heard a preliminary form of the amendment, I'm a little bit concerned about us meddling in it. If I'm not mistaken, currently, the school board can deny a step raise to a teacher that is not judged to be making satisfactory endeavors as a teacher. From the sounds of that amendment, we would lock their hands and say, even if we had a teacher that the school board decided to renew their contract, but wanted them on probation so that they could demonstrate improvement in their performance, they would still not be able to deny them the step increase. When we start going into things like that, I think we may be getting into areas that we don't understand, and we don't know the far-reaching consequences that may happen from it, and I would not be encouraged to see it put in.
What you're saying is that the language might have some unintended consequences?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Ms. Hill?
I just want to second your thoughts, Mr. Sinclair, and say this is a very fair contract. Not only are they paying more, but they took a different plan than they had before. And the explanation that you didn't get explains that they had lost wages over the last 2 years, not gross wages, but net, because of state-mandated increases in their retirement. And I have great teachers for my kids, and I don't want them leaving and going somewhere else.
Okay, anybody else? Mr. Sinclair?
You don't sound thrilled to hear from me, Mr. Moderator.
Well, I'm always thrilled to hear from you, Mr. Sinclair.
And I did receive this. Having looked at it now, I did receive it and look through it myself. My concern is, again, with just being transparent and informative, and the language says modest raises, which is just a subjective term. What is modest to you may not be modest to someone else. And it was just an effort to provide specific details to allow the voter to make a more informed decision.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Are you ready to close the debate? Yes. Okay. And Mr. Ozier, would you like to make that motion to close debate? Okay. And would you like to second that? Okay. All those in favor of closing debate on Article 2 signify by saying aye. Aye. We'll move on to Article 3. Article 3, provision for special meeting. Shall the district, if Article 2 is defeated, authorize the Newfound Area School Board to call one special meeting at its option to address Article 2 cost items only? And who would like to address that? Mr. McCormick. Dr. McCormick, I guess it is.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning. This article is intended in the event that the collective bargaining agreement does not pass at the voting session. It provides an opportunity, not a requirement, but an opportunity for the school board and teacher association to agree to and if they are able to agree to a revised collective bargaining agreement, again in the case if it was defeated in March, whereby it could have a special district meeting without going to the time and cost of trying to get a special district meeting through Superior Court, which is usually granted in an emergency situation.
Any comments or questions? You heard enough? And a motion to close debate by Ms. Duncan, seconded by Mr. Ogier. All those in favor of closing debate signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? We close debate. Yep, thank you. That'd be great. Article 4, limited fund balance retention. Shall we adopt the provisions of RSA 198-4B2 and authorize indefinitely until specific rescission the school district to retain year-end unassigned general funds in the amount not to exceed in any fiscal year 2.5% of the current year's net assessment pursuant to RSA 198-5 for the purpose of having funds on hand to use as a revenue source for emergency expenditures and over expenditures under RSA 3211, or to be used as a revenue source to reduce the tax rate. The school board recommends, and the budget committee recommends this article. And who would like to address that? Mr. Migliori?
Sure. I need to present this in the context of your knowledge that Article 5 is also here today, but will be discussed separately. That is restricted just to building fund maintenance. This was a rather tumultuous year for the school board and the district as a whole, as you know, most of you know. House Bill 101 was enacted on January 2nd, which saved Newfound from having to delete about a $900,000, $700,000 to $900,000 surplus from its calculation in funding the budget for next year. The good news on that as well, which was a completely bipartisan and unanimous effort, which when we saw that, we recommended that they bottle up that recipe and send it down to Washington. It's also underway for a permanent fix as well, and the Senate passed on Thursday SB 2, which is coincidentally the permanent fix for the temporary fix for Newfound. All of that said, this extended fund balance is new legislation that came about last year, and it gives us as a district the opportunity to retain or put another arrow in the quiver, if you will, to maintain fiscal management collectively with everything that your school board is recommending, and in concert, I might add, with the school budget committee. And so this article is something we ask you to approve to give us that flexibility. I do hope there'll be some thorough discussion on it to understand more clearly exactly what flexibility it gives us. But it's very restrictive. This does not allow us to just take a 2% excess and put it aside every year and accumulate that. It limits us annually to 2% of the local taxes raised, and if it aggregates in the cumulative beyond that, we have to give that back to the taxpayers. So it's essentially a 2% expendable trust fund to be used for emergency expenditures. That would not include building maintenance, which is Article 5, which is exclusively limited to if a roof falls in or if there's a problem through snow or whatever the problem might be. We could use it for that purpose. We could also use it to fund an unexpected special education expense, as an example. But we have to go through a public hearing to you, the voters. We have to get permission from the Department of Education. It's very restrictive. It's just another good fiscal management tool. And that is the reason we are asking for your approval to give it to us. Collectively, of all the other articles that are on the ballot, to pass the teachers' agreement, to give us this tool, to give us the expendable trust fund for building maintenance, and without comment on Article 6, tax cap rescission, the operating budget as well, which is Article 7, as proposed.
Any questions or comments? Mr. Rozier?
Archie Ozier from Bristol. I've spent some time studying this particular issue, and I'm afraid I have to take not only the school board but the budget committee head on because I flat out disagree with what they have to say. Now, I would like to explain why I disagree. It's not because I'm contrary most of the time. All right. A properly prepared budget is the best foreseeable estimate of the funds needed to operate the district for the ensuing year. Now, recognizing that the crystal ball that these people have to use to figure out how much money that is, the state in 1965 passed a contingency fund law, which just happens to be what we're speaking about. The new law, if you will, is an addition to a law that was written in 1965 on contingencies. And that's Chapter 198, Section 198.4b. Now, the modification took place in August of 2012, and it allows cooperative districts to reserve a portion of the unexpended fund balance as a contingency fund. Now, going back in history a bit, let's look at Newfound. Newfound, under the first part of the contingency law established in 1955, used to have a contingency fund $15,000 or less, and we did that and voted it in each year for years and years and years. Well, $15,000 on a $20 million budget is peanuts. So, in fact, the district just kind of dropped having that article. But let me say to you that over the 50 years, the district has used the contingency fund, I believe it's twice. One to repair an artesian well in Danbury, and I've forgotten the other reason at this point why it used it, but it was some very minor kind of issue. So, there's not a long history of using contingency funds. Now, what used to happen in terms of the budgeting practice was that the administration would submit its budget to the school board, and in that budget would be line items that had additional money than what was actually required. Okay, for example, it used to be that teachers' salaries, if you checked the contracts against the actual amount budgeted, there'd be more money requested than what was actually needed to meet the contracts. Well, that's a good budgeting practice, but it got to the point where that amount of money was quite significant. So a few years ago, when I was sitting on the budget committee, we made the change. The budget committee said, look, when you give us the budget, make sure that you make it very clear and very obvious how much extra money that we're putting in over the contracted amount, for example, as with teacher salaries. That's been done, and you can look through your budget and you will see contingency in a whole bunch of areas throughout the budget. Now, if you do a spreadsheet analysis and pull out all the contingency monies, right now, in this year's budget, there's $258,752 available to the school board to spend where they choose to spend it. They need no approval from anybody to do that. They're requesting next year, for fiscal year 14, $290,702. That's a significant, quote, contingency fund, I think. But it doesn't tie their hands, and they don't have to go to the Department of Education. They don't have to get permission from the Budget Committee to spend that. They simply move it around where they need to. Now, I'm not saying that that budget was done incorrectly. I'm saying it was budgeted wisely because you need that kind of flexibility in a $20 million budget. But I am saying we don't need to add another $272,000 or so, which is what this proposed article would allow the school board to have to work with. You put those two figures together, and next year the school board would have over $500,000 of contingency money. I think that money would be better used and better handled in the hands of the local town selectmen. And I don't see it as the role of the school board to determine when the tax rate needs to change. That's the function of the Board of Selectmen. You know, I understand the flexibility it gives you, and I think it, you know, there are arguments and many on both sides of the issue. But I don't think it's a good financial move, and I don't think it's good money management to allow that kind of excess money to be available. So I would ask you not to support this article. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Janet, Cody.
Janet Cody from Bristol. Just a clarification first. The article says 2.5%. You were mentioning 2. Okay. Is that correct? We're working on 2.5. All right. Secondly, a lot of this came about, and the discussion's coming about because of that 700,000 surplus that we had. Can you give us an idea of where that 700,000 came from?
If I could generally, I'm going to defer to Dan specifically on that. But the general comments that are of concern here have to do with the budget surplus that we end up with in general. I see this as a tool to help us eliminate that. We budget for contingencies because there has been no tool up till now. And as a result, come June 30th or so, for the past several years, there's been more than $500,000 in surplus. I might stand corrected on that for 1 or 2 years along the way, but over the past several years, that's been the case. That's always frustrated me. I always wonder why we can't manage better fiscally. And it has to do with the need for the contingency funding that Archie suggested. Currently, if you were to vote this in, it would enable us to be far more fiscally conservative on the contingency budgeting side, knowing that we would have at least another 2.5% of the local taxes raised available to us as a capped level, if you will, from year to year available to us. And so we're not looking to add contingency budgeting to this article and aggregate that amount. We're looking instead to get our fiscal house in order with the tools that the legislature has finally seen fit to give us the opportunity to do. It becomes a question of whether or not you have faith in your school board, and in this case your budget committee that also supports the article. Dan, would you?
Do you have something more specific?
So I think the portion of your question that I've been asked to address is the nature of the fund balance from the previous year.
Yes.
Last year's fund balance of $698,000 was in the big picture was a combination of two things. You had expenses under budget in a long list of categories that totaled about $500,000, and I'll give you some of those categories in a second. You also had revenues above budget. They were about $201,000. An example would be Medicaid reimbursement. We had budgeted for a certain amount of Medicaid reimbursement for some of our special ed costs of $200,000, and we received $305,000. So the way some districts handle an increase in revenue such as that is that they'll hold a special meeting like the type that's talked about and ask for permission to spend that extra money, whereas this district chooses to hold fast to the bottom line that's appropriated through this process and report the excess revenue as simply that excess revenue goes towards the fund balance. An example of some of the savings that we had incurred, some of the savings we achieved, I should say, last year. There are some transportation savings. We brought a number of students who are placed out of district back into district, so our special ed transportation budget, for example, was under budget in terms of expenditures by a little over $100,000. We went out to bid for our electricity supply and brought our cost of electricity, not the delivery cost, but you can bid out the supply portion, and we brought that down by about 25%, so that's about $30,000. There are some facilities personnel, there was some staff exchange, some people that retired after the budget process, and that results in a net savings because you tend to hire a more junior person and when someone retires, it's a more senior person, so there's what I'll call the savings through staff exchange. And there was supplies, for example, the general education supplies, pencil, papers, things like that, $8,000. There were some health insurance changes. There was tuition reimbursement was under expended. Professional development, computer services, we didn't spend the entire computer budget to the tune of $45,000. Utilities in total was about $40,000. It was a somewhat mild winter last winter. So there's really hundreds. I mean, our budget is 4,000 line items long, and there are dozens and dozens of things that add up. So as I said, the big picture is about $500,000 in expenses underspent to budget and about $200,000 in revenue over, and that sums to the 700.
That helps a great deal. Thank you.
We'll call upon him first. Yes, sir.
I'm Lou Lieto from Groton. I have a comment and a question. The comment is in another school district in another state which operates very similarly to New Hampshire, it has been the procedure to have such a statutory reserve fund balance available, very much similar to the one that we're talking about today, for many decades, and it has proven itself time and time again. What it has done, and this is my question to the board, is virtually eliminate any need for contingency items in the budget. And is it the board's intention going forward after this year, should this amendment be approved, to do away with contingency line items and supplant them with this item?
I would be remiss in speaking on behalf of the entire board to tell you that that were the case. I do not know how we would react to it. I would like to give us the option to have that discussion. I see this as a necessary solution to what I consider to be an ongoing problem, and I'd like to share with you an item from the New Hampshire School Board Association dated February 1st, only yesterday, that I felt hits home on Article 4. They're talking about national issues that are going to affect local education. And school funding is a major concern for local districts. Unless Congress intervenes before March of this year, federal cuts to public education from sequestration would impact local districts significantly, likely in the 5 to 8% range, for programs such as Title I and IDEA. Furthermore, these cuts would continue over a 10-year period, impacting services provided for students with disabilities and disadvantaged students year after year. The concern with the top-down nature of the new mandates impacting local school districts is where I'm coming from on this, and the need to provide more flexibility to local boards as we oversee and set policy for the local schools. An article like this would give us that kind of flexibility. All too often, the activities that occur in Washington have impacted local school district policy and programs in ways that go beyond the intent of the specific law. But you, have to deal with that. This article gives us that flexibility, and hopefully, Lou, to address the issue of reducing the number of contingencies that we have. But I don't know what the new board will decide to do.
I'd like to follow that up then. To start with, I recognize the need to both have contingencies and this fund proposal in this year's budget, because you don't know if it'll pass or not, and therefore the contingencies are a fail-safe. And so that's a fair statement. Having said that, I am a little bit surprised that the issue of whether or not contingencies would be reduced in the future were not at least a topic of conversation, but recognizing that the board will change, it's still a legitimate item that should have been discussed. Your comment about the reduction in funding going forward, and that is years after this coming year, to me doesn't ring quite true with respect to this proposal, because after this year, if those changes are enacted in March, if the sequestration does in fact occur, that represents a dislocation for this year, in some sense a surprise. But for the following years, it's no longer a surprise. For the following years, you can still budget for it in advance because you know it. And so I'm not sure that that's a self-consistent argument.
Thank you, Mr. Lado. Fran?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You know, we say contingency, and people say, you know, what is that? You know, the adage about you should always have so many months emergency money set aside. It's kind of like what a contingency is. You know, towns do have this flexibility already, and school districts were not able to until this legislation was passed last year. Some towns reserve as much as 15% of their local taxes raised that they carry forward as a surplus, because the law allows it. And actually, the Department of Revenue Administration highly recommends that they carry that forward because it gives them flexibility in management skills. But bear in mind that towns can do something that school districts cannot. Towns can go out and borrow money schools can't. If a town finds themselves short on funds because of whatever unexpected expenditures, they can simply go and raise taxes based on projected revenue of taxes that they are going to be receiving. And that's another interesting point. School districts only get money when it's sent from the towns. And in some cases, the school district does not get revenue from the towns, particularly at the beginning of the year, until 2 to 3 weeks later after the first of the month. So if we sweep out June 30th and everything goes to a zero balance, school has no money because all the surplus was supposedly returned against the next year's taxes. They have really technically no money to operate on until school district payments are made by the towns. So this gives a little bit of float. They can't spend it for other purposes, but it does give a little bit of float that it's there. You heard $500,000. If this past year we had had this provision on that $700,000 surplus, we would have been talking $140,000. The problem with saying we can do away with contingencies is because there's a number of contingencies, and Mr. Rossner mentioned a few of them. Let's say all of our single teachers got married and went into family plans. That's a big increase that wasn't budgeted. You want us to budget on the money, but there are some things that you cannot project. Special ed kids, things of that nature. So contingencies are always going to have to be there to some degree. Maybe they don't have to be as large, but the big difference is to spend this money under this provision, that's 2.5% maximum, you have to have a special hearing, whereas contingency funds can be done simply by school board action at a regular public school board meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Thune?
Yes, John Thune, Bristol. Obviously, I can't speak with expertise on this particular article from the standpoint of having studied the law and understanding what it says. But what I am hearing today is I'm hearing that in addition to contingencies, which, by the way, towns are not allowed to have, we can't have a contingency fund in Bristol. We can put a little money into each extra line, yes, but we can't have a line that says contingency fund. I'm hearing that, and I understand, as Lou suggested, that there's the problem this year that you've got the article and you still got to do the budget. But I think it would have been better for the school board to have made a commitment to reduce contingency funds in the event of the passage of this article. I really have a hard time putting them both in place. My recommendation to the voters of this district for this year would be to reject this article and have the school board reconsider it for next year when they can better understand how it would affect budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Do you want to close the debate? Your short comment, Mr. Rozier? We're going to test you. You need to go to a microphone in any event. You're going to make one, and we have one other person behind you, and then I'm going to take a motion to close the debate after she speaks, okay?
Well, there were several comments that were just made by the current Budget Committee chair that I don't think were really accurate in terms of the law. The statement was made that, some towns don't pay their bills at the beginning of the school year on July 1st, and that's true, and it makes it very difficult. But this contingency fund under this article would not solve that issue at all, because you have to use that money under RSA 32-11. And that's a process that's going to take about a month to get through. And I'm sure you're familiar with RSA 3211. It just goes on and on and on. So that example really wasn't all clearness and light there in that situation. I have worn out my welcome, I can tell by the expression, so I'll have a seat. Thank you.
Yeah, you're always welcome, Archie. Yes.
Suzanne Smith Hebron. As I understand it, we are not giving approval with this article to spend 2.5% more. We are asking for the ability to hold it back just in case we need to. And is it true that if we don't use it one year, we have to give it back in taxes the following year? We're not holding it over every year, correct?
That's
okay.
correct.
And from what I've seen in this past 6 months with the problems the school district has faced with almost having to really slash the budget more this year, this 2.5% could help in emergency situations, although it wouldn't have helped that much this year. And it isn't not, as Ms. Wendelbo said, it would not have been enough this year, and it is not a huge amount of money that we're asking to hold back. But it would really benefit the school district if emergencies came up. For instance, if the roof fell in, there was more snow, or if people got married and had family plans. Correct? Is that right? Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hill, are you moving to close debate?
I will,
Yes. And seconded by Mr. Capsalis in the back. All those, this is with regard to Article 4. All those in favor of closing debate on Article 4, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And all those opposed, nay. We'll move on to Article 5, Expendable Trust Fund Building Maintenance, to see if the Newfound Area School District will vote to raise and appropriate up to the sum of $60,000 to be added to the Expendable Trust Fund Building Maintenance, and to authorize the use, transfer in that amount from the undesignated fund balance available July 1st, 2013 for this purpose. Not included in Article 7, which is the operating budget, and this is recommended by both the school board and the budget committee. And who would like to address that? Ms. Jeannie.
I'll just read the explanation in your booklet. Expendable Trust Fund Building Maintenance. This article is the yearly request for funds to be added to the Expendable Trust Fund for building maintenance. The transfer only occurs if there are funds available at the end of the current fiscal year, unexpended fund balance. These funds can only be used for building maintenance purposes. The current trust balance is $60,000.
Any discussion or questions? Any? Yep. Slim.
I have a question. This is, well, you call me Slim. Yes, that's true, of Steve Spafford, Groton. Question. It says building. Now, I noticed this year there was a tremendous amount in the district schools of paving. Is that included under that? Is that considered building? Because I know patching in some places could have been very nice and easier and cheaper. Just wondering if that's, I'd like to know if that's covered, because as Dan said, out of all the lines he's got to read off, which he wasn't going to do, and I don't blame him, I want to know if that paving was actually written in that was to be used this year.
Excuse me, I'm assuming you're talking about the road reconstruction project here at Newfound Regional High School on the east side of Newfound Road.
Also, the Newfound Bristol Hebron was repaved this year. I saw that. Also up at the elementary school was.
Okay.
The parking lots.
So let me start with two answers to your question. Number one, all the paving work we've done, none of it has been paid for from the Building Maintenance Trust Fund that this article addresses. All the paving we've done since I've been here, work at the Bridgewater Hebron Village School was handled by the Bridgewater Hebron Village District, not even this school district's fund. That's its own little entity. The entity that built and owns that building and leases it to the school district, they handle the paving at that building. The pavement that was done, the parking lot and paving work that was done at the middle school 2 summers ago, that was a federally funded grant. The paving at Bristol Elementary School, which was in the summer of 2011, was in the district budget under maintenance projects in the 2600 section. And the work on the reconstruction of the east end of Newfound Road here at the high school, That was also in the general budget under the maintenance project section in your 2600 function of plant and facilities maintenance. So none of the pavement work came out of this trust fund. Yep.
Any other questions or comments? And no? Ms. Martin, you moving to close debate? Yes. Okay, thank you. And seconded by Mr. Rozier, I guess. All those in favor of closing debate on Article 5, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Article 6, tax cap rescission. Shall we rescind the provisions of RSA 32.5B, known as the tax cap, as adopted by the Newfound Area School District on March 13, 2012, so that there will no longer be a limit on increases to the recommended budget and the amount to be raised by local taxes. This was submitted by petition at the time of voting, which would be in March. It would require a 60% or 3/5 vote. And this was submitted by petition. Is there a petitioner who would like to address that today? Does anybody like to address that, I guess? Okay. Yeah, briefly?
This is an article that was passed this past year. It has had one opportunity to see how it works. Now, at this point, it seems to have worked reasonably well. The school board, the budget committee have come to an agreement on what the budget is. And if we look at this article and we look at what the tax cap does, it affects one group right there. That's where the limit is placed. And if the voters of the district, yeah, is that my signal, Mr. Moderator?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Actually, if they were in my court, they'd be paying $25 right now. So.
If the voters of the district wish to increase the budget, they have every right to do so, and the tax cap has absolutely no meaning to what the voters